This is the Tikkun Elevator Kolo. Your reader is Baruch Fleischman, and we're reading here and analyzing the demographic changes that took place. In other words, where do the Jews live? Where do they move to? I went through the map the last time, this map that we're looking at. We got a look at the Jewish garb from the 15th century, the 1400s, which was common in Europe. And then we went major expulsions, and we went through all of those things. We discussed the demographics of the Jews who lived in England during this period, what happened to them, and in France. Now my commentary, which is a little bit different, is really based on the... Okay, let me stop that. Well, this is Baruch. I'm back with another shiur here on this tremendous book. It's a documentation, the best that we have, of Jewish life in Europe until the time of, later it's going to go into the time of the massacres of Khmelnytsky. That's 1658, 1659, Tach V'Tat in the Jewish calendar. But here we're dealing with the time before that, from the 13th century and the expulsion from Spain. And I want to reiterate a point that I'm trying to make. I'm speaking to a Jewish audience, or an audience that is pro-Jewish. You have to compare this, because the rabbis say that the Romans are descended from our half-brother. Now, it's not a half-brother, it's a full brother, a twin brother, a fraternal twin brother of the Jewish people. That is the descendants of our brother Esav. Now, we've been through this before, just barely touched on it, but this is actually the opinion of the rabbis. In the time of Jesus, there were thousands of people who were crucified. Of the thousands of people who were crucified, the Romans chose to believe, several hundred years later, that this man was the Messiah, and then they created a complete religion around the name of the person. Jesus is not a Jewish name, so Jesus is also not a Jewish name. Maybe his name was Joshua, that's a Jewish name, something else. But at any rate, this became their religion. And as you watch and you see how the church, the Roman Empire, evolved into the Holy Roman Empire, the Papal Empire, the Christian Roman Empire, the Roman Christian Empire. There were actually two parts to it. One was in the East, which still exists today, great influence in Russia, and the other is in the West, which of course we understand that today. This is our Roman Empire that we're used to seeing. It is how it is that the Romans crucified the blood, you can imagine, of all of those thousands of Jews that they crucified, to develop, then take the Jews that survived the destruction of the temple, bring them back to Rome again, make them slaves. Jews buy themselves out of slavery, and start growing again. Our communities grow. But the church, which was now the Roman Church, never forgot the Jews. And so now we are the crucified, slaughtered with the sword. We are the ones whose blood is being let in tremendous, tremendous qualities. We are, in my opinion, and you could see this from what's going on, we are the Jesus, the crucified Jesus. Continuing on, the Romans have a deep, deep-seated hate for Jews. It was a few days ago that we saw that the Pope came out that he wants a genocide, going to start going along with the genocide idea that's popular amongst the leftists and the Arabs and the Muslims. Yes, they can kill us, but we can't kill them. So that's the kind of situation that you have. We can fight with them, but we can't win a war. That's the Pope. That's the church. And you can remember back to, there have been popes who have been beneficent to Jews, but doesn't last that long because it keeps coming back to the same deep-seated hatred that the Romans have for the Jews. Now let's come over here and let's see what's going on in Germany. Germany, we're talking about the 13th century until the expulsion of Spain, which is approximately, well, not approximately, was the year 1492. And we're going to get into that. Germany's Jewish population increased between the 11th and 13th centuries. During the subsequent 200 years, the population grew only gradually. Why would that be? It says the Hohenstaufen rulers founded many times that attracted Jewish settlers. The number of Jews massacred in Mainz during the First Crusade is indicative of the size of this major Jewish community. Jewish sources give a figure of 1,000 to 100 to 1,300 people killed, murdered, and massacred, while Christian sources cite 1,014, but you get the idea. The number of Jewish, the Nuremberg, I guess it's Nuremberg, but he says Nuremberg Jewish community is recorded in a tax list from 1338 as having 212 persons, decreasing to 150 by 1449. Another reliable demographic source is the Nuremberg Memorbuch. I guess it's a record, in which the names of 628 martyrs of Rheinsfleisch massacres, because that's something that happened, the Rheinsfleisch massacres, which took place in the year 1298, were recorded. Apparently, the community recuperated since the massacres of 1349, which claimed 570 victims. To these numbers, one must add those Jews who escaped. The community numbered some 1,000 in the 13th and 14th centuries. Nuremberg recovered after the Black Death and became one of the largest communities in Germany. In 1498, when the Jews were expelled from the town, it had a population of about 20,000. I don't know if that means 20,000 Jews or 20,000 people altogether. It was a large population. According to S.W. Barron, the total Jewish population of Germany and Austria at the beginning of the 14th century was about 10,000. In 1500, there were in all of Germany, the Holy Roman Empire, about 12 million people. Therefore, the percentage of Jews was very small. Because the Jewish population was primarily an urban one, it is difficult to calculate the population of every town and village. So this gives you some kind of an idea. The Romans, we say, as the Holy Roman Empire, still murdering Jews, going on in their same way. In Italy, the demography of Jews in Italy differed considerably in the north and the south. In the 12th century, 1260s, Benjamin of Tudela found 500 families or taxpayers in Naples, 600 in Salerno, 500 in Otranto, 300 in Capua, 300 in Taranto, 200 in Benevento, 200 in Malfi, and 200 in Trani. He found 20 families in the port of Malfi. At this time, the town was in a depression. In this period, Sicily was heavily populated with Jews. 200 in Messina, 1,500 families in Palermo, the largest single concentration of Jews in southern Italy. Until the expulsion of 1493, after the expulsion from Spain, because Sicily, as we learned previously, was part of Spain at that time, was the center of Italian Jewish life. Palermo and Syracuse had about 5,000 Jews each at the time of the expulsion. Therefore, Nico Ferrarelli estimated the number of Jews in Sicily at about 50,000. That's in the year 1492. This figure seems accurate, since Attilio Milano, who was a historian from 1907 to 1969, he lived, arrived at a figure of 37,046 Jews for Sicily, with its 45 communities, and Malta, Gozo, and Pantelleria. There was also a community in Sardinia during the period of the Aragonese rule. In the 16th and 17th centuries, the community of Rome developed considerably. In 1527, there were 1,738 Jews. Venice in the 16th and 17th centuries was the largest and most important of the northern communities, numbering several hundred Jews. During the 15th to 17th centuries, the Jews of Italy migrated from one place to the next, achieving a degree of communal organization similar to that achieved by Jews of Ashkenaz in Spain in the 13th century. He writes, frequently the number of Jewish immigrants exceeded those who were native-born, especially from the expulsion of the Jews from the southern towns in 1492 to 1511. That shifted the Jewish center of gravity to Rome and northward, where the Jewish population was about 25,000 to 30,000, a figure that remained unchanged for several centuries. This gives you an idea of what was going on in Italy. Now, this is a long column. I'll try to keep it going here. The Jewish population of Castile grew from 60,000 to 1300 in 1300 to 160,000 by 1492. By contrast, the Jewish population in Aragon decreased to 75,000. The Valle had 15,000 Jews. A knowledge of the number of Jews in Spain in 1492 really is an essential factor in estimating the size of the Jewish population of Europe, Asia, and Africa from the 16th centuries onwards. The number of Jews expelled from Spain has been estimated by both Jewish and Christian sources. The priest historian Andres Bernaldez, a contemporary of the expulsion period, estimated that in 1492 there were 35,000 heads of Jewish family in Castile and 6,000 in Aragon. Now they had whole families. One Jewish document calculates 50,000 heads of family, while another estimates that 53,000 were expelled. Isaac Barbanel lived between 1437 and 1508, and I know that he was an influential figure in the court of Fernando and Isabel, estimated the number that left and crossed the Portuguese border on foot at 300,000 young and old, children and women, which would mean that in Castile there were between 150,000 to 200,000 Jews at the time of the expulsion. Another method of calculation is by the size of the communities. For example, the Jewish community of Cáceres in Extremadura numbered 130 persons, and in the neighboring Talavera de la Reina, between the years 1477 and 1487, there were 168 communities, 168 families, these numbers being typical of many other communities. A conservative estimate of the Castilian communities will show that between 1486 and 1491, there were 14,000 to 15,300 families. Estimating 6 people per family, we would reach a figure of under 100,000. If we add to the number of Jews who left Spain some of the conversos, people who were first forcibly converted, we will arrive at the total Jewish population towards the end of the 15th century. A further source of information is the tax paid by the refugees, crossing the Portuguese border. They have, in other words, the Jews who were expelled from Spain, most of them went to Portugal, each of whom had to pay 8 cruzados, and they had lists of this, just like the Germans had lists. They had lists for permission to cross over and to reside for 8 months in the Kingdom of Portugal. You had to pay them, what he says, 88 cruzados. I'm not sure what that means. So it could be per person. A cruzado probably that's a Christian word, which is the word crosses. He says they had to pay this. Here a figure of 120,000 could be reached. We also know that those who went to North Africa in hired ships numbered approximately 50,000. Several thousand refugees crossed the border of the Kingdom of Navarre in 1493, having been given certificates of passage and protection so that they might get to Spanish ports whence they could embark. About 50,000 Jews went to Italy, and several thousand to Avignon. all these figures bring us close to the estimate of 200,000 Jews who were expelled from Spain. Let me just push this up as best I can. These figures refer only to the Jews of Europe, and whom we must add also the Jews of Poland and Lithuania, estimated to be about 50 to 60 communities, approximately 30,000 persons. In the 15th century, Hungary and the Balkans had very few Jewish communities until the arrival of the Spanish refugees. That's a very interesting fact, that these areas were built up by Jews who fled Spain. By comparison with our knowledge of European Jewish demography, we are in the dark concerning the number of Jews in North Africa, including Egypt and Asia. North Africa had sizable Jewish communities in the 10th and 11th centuries, but there was a decline in the 12th and the 13th centuries. As to the persecution, which was tremendous riots, the pogroms of 1399, 1391, and then ultimately buying 100 years is basically what happened. The Jews bought themselves 100 years. Persecuted in 39 and the expulsion, which took place 101 years later. Jews from Spain reached North Africa. In Asia, concentrations of Jews could be found in Iran and Iraq, and it's reasonable to assume that they numbered several thousands. We have no information about the size of 16th century Jewish communities in Yemen, the Ottoman Empire, Byzantine, Asia Minor, and Palestine. However, we know that the revival of the Jewish yeshiva in Palestine in the 16th century brought with it a substantial increase in the number of Jews in the Holy Land. Now we have here, to kind of finish this off, a map Jewish populations in Europe by percentages during this period of time. So we see over here that in Spain, you had 41.7% of the Jewish population was living in Spain, and 13.4%, which makes it over 50%, living in Portugal. Then there was Jewish community in what was called Lithuania, Poland, which is the farm country in the east of Poland and Poland itself, including Lithuania and the extension of Poland. This was all Ukraine, all the Baltic states. This was all part of Lithuania. Hungary had a very small population, 3.4. France also, not so big. The Holy Empire, which has included Switzerland and the Low Countries, which is basically the German areas in Austria, he had 13.2%. And here in Italy, there were 20%. Now, this little map on the inside tried to give you an idea of the percentage of Jews who were in the population of the countries in which they lived. So they estimate, Dr. BEINART estimates, or maybe doesn't estimate, maybe he can actually count it up. In the year 1300, there was a total population in Europe of 44 million people. By 1492, there were 53,800,000. The Jewish population, while there was 44 million in 1300 in total of all the people, were 450. In 1492, it was 600,000. So we're a very small percentage, 450,000, 600,000 at different times. We made up the Jews as percentage of the population is 1.02% in 1300, 1.22% in 1492. No matter how many we were, though, they still hated us. This is Baruch Fleischman. We are here to talk about it, analyze it, and know it.